Welcome to the Leader Post Rider Rumblings podcast, episode number 148. Taylor Shire and Darrell Davis are with you again for another week, and we're discussing the Labor Day Classic, which was certainly a classic, Darrell. It came right down to the wire. The game sort of had everything, but ultimately the Riders failed to win yet again, dropping, or I guess winless now in their sixth straight game, losing 35-33 to the Bombers in the Labor Day Classic. There's a lot to discuss, and we'll get into all of it, but what are your sort of opening thoughts after that one on Sunday?
So many things are going wrong for the Roughriders, right? They're close. You can see that they have a compete level, Taylor. They play hard, and give them credit for that, but winning is everything that matters in the Canadian Football League and pro sports, and they're not winning. Regardless of how it happens, what happens, they're not winning. So you have to think that there's something going wrong. You have to wonder what can be done to improve upon it, but I don't know. I just keep finding it amazing how they were such a good team at the start of the year and pulled all those games out, and now they can't pull anything out of the fire.
Yeah, and when I look back at the game, there's a few lapses, and it wasn't even, to me, it didn't come right down to the wire. It shouldn't have come right down to the wire. There's a few lapses here and there that if those minor plays at the time don't go that way, don't go the way of Winnipeg, then it's a different game. I think about the Mario Alford punt. He fumbled the punt. You look at the punt, it takes a weird bounce. He tries to put a hand on it. Nick Hallett recovers in the end zone for a touchdown. Huge swing, right? Eventually, obviously, that a touchdown like that's the difference. Even the Rouge on the kickoff after I believe it was after Dembski scored, like they give up a single point there. It's not Alford's fault. It's just I think you got to try to return that one based on how the game was going, but it's so early in the game where giving up a single point is fine, but that point ultimately cost them because the Riders were forced to go for two later in the game. Obviously, the 2-point convert was unsuccessful, so had Winnipeg not gotten a Rouge there, Lothar would have came in and kicked a convert after that touchdown. We would probably end up going to overtime, and who knows what happened. So that I don't know if that's an error. That's just one of those ones where it you look back on it and it's costly, but the fumble by Mario Alford, I think, was maybe the sort of biggest mental, obviously, but just an overall error by Alford that ultimately cost them.
Yeah, usually he flips the field for them. He's such a good returner. Doesn't he hold the record for Rough Rider return touchdowns? So usually he is a big player for them. But that fumble was definitely the play of the game, the turning point in the game. It put the Rough Riders at a huge disadvantage, and they weren't able to come back from it. The single ended up being an important point, but at the time it didn't seem like it. So you can second guess the strategy in hindsight, which we like to do, right? But there's just something that's not going right for them. Trevor Harris was great. 368 yards or something? Pass for it in his third game back. The offense wasn't too bad. Defense had a couple of breakdowns on that Dembski touchdown you referenced. There was somebody, CJ Rivas turned around and looked at the two guys behind him and said, "You guys, I let him go. One of you was supposed to pick him up," and nobody did. So Dembski does that quite a bit against the Rough Riders, and all these things that happened. Just the little breakdowns at the wrong time. You're right. It seems to really, really crush the Rough Riders.
And in the end, there was still an opportunity to win the game. I think the 2-point convert, I asked Trevor about that following the game, and I think that's obviously a throw he wants back. He was sort of misguided on where Jones was going to go on the coverage, and all of a sudden Jones is right there, and Harris throws it basically right to him. He drops it, but
wasn't Jones, hadn't he moved over too, because Big Hill was out, right? And usually he's the outside linebacker and moved into inside. So he played it a little differently than Big Hill might have too, right? So they weren't quite prepared. And you could see Harris, as soon as he threw it, he went, oops. He was mad at himself about that one because he totally misread it. And it ended up being a huge play.
I think that was his first read. He went over to the other side of the field, then came back, and Jones was still there to make the play. So that's certainly a play Trevor does want back. You put together that impressive scoring drive, and he said, the 2-point convert should be the easy part. They did the hard part of getting down, punching into the end zone, and with still time left on the clock to recover that onside kick. To me, it was sort of a Hail Mary kick. I guess I'll call it a Hail Mary 60-yard kick. Like, I don't know if Brett would ever have the leg to make that against the wind, or any kicker for that matter. Maybe Castillo in Winnipeg, but Mace even referenced that post game where he didn't realize how far back they were pushed. So to me, I'm like, well, do you even try a kick when you really know that your chances are quite low, or do you try a Hail Mary pass, maybe hope for a pass interference, maybe hope for a completion? I think the kick is probably the right strategy because it has the best chance of going through, I would say, but 60 yards is quite tough.
Yeah, I agree with you. The kick was the better of the two strategies. They thought they had another 4 or 5 yards. When you see Lothar walk onto the field, he thought the pass interference penalty that had preceded that had given them a little bit better field position, and he looked a little shocked when he was kicking from 60. But that's what you had to try, and the wind was subtle. You could tell, though, on the kicking game. When Lothar had kicked off earlier in the game, he nailed one of his kickoffs to the 1 yard line, and they don't go that far unless they're with the wind. So he was kicking into the wind, which is a tough one. Should the Riders have had the wind in the fourth quarter? Well, maybe. They took the ball at the start of the second half. That was their option, and didn't get the wind. I think if you play it again, they might say, yeah, we'd like that wind in the fourth quarter if they get exactly the same thing setting up. But Lothar, it was interesting watching the TSN telecast that right from behind the post that the TV camera was set up, and it looked like Lothar was right down the middle on that 60-yarder, and then they pan out and you see the returner, I think it was Lucky Whitehead, was upfield a little bit, 5-6 yards into the field of play, and you think, I guess it's not going to make it, but he hit it right on the nose, and it did give it. They had a chance. It was an amazing short kickoff recovery, and they did some funny things that gave them a chance to win, but they didn't.
Yeah, like I said, a few plays here and there, but I think overall the offense had a great game. They were 4 for 5 in the red zone.
Some drops, though, once again, right?
Some drops. So I should say Trevor Harris and guided the offense to a great game. Yeah. There was a lot of mental lapses and drops by the receivers. But referencing Harris, he was able to punch it in because he's, we've talked about that time and time again about needing to score in the red zone. They were 4 for 5 on Sunday in the red zone. I think they scored on 4 of their 7 possessions in the second half, field goals and touchdowns. So they put together this comeback, which we've talked about that they haven't been able to do in recent weeks. So I think that against a good Winnipeg defense, so again, I guess that is a good sign. Although if you don't win, what does it really matter, right?
Yeah, that's true. And the defense had a couple of breakdowns. The offense, Trevor Harris has looked fine. There's some people clamoring for Shea Patterson just to change things up. That doesn't make any sense. Their best chance to win is with Trevor Harris back there. Once again, they botched a few things at the end of the first half again that they probably could have gotten a field goal out of if they had played the clock better. But his clock management at the end of the game was pretty good. So Corey Mace, first-year head coach, Mark Mueller, first year as an offensive coordinator, they're doing a little bit. They seem to do a little better job of handling the clock. The drops hurt them. There's nothing you can do about that except replace them, and they've moved their receivers around like crazy. What really hurt them was the offensive line. And, Micah Johnson, a defensive tackle, one of the best defensive linemen in the league, had to play right guard because they lost 2 more offensive linemen, including Peter Godber, who was their center. It was mass confusion for a while. They did pretty well, but you when you watch what happened on the offense, and it's pretty impressive what Trevor Harris accomplished, because rather than a 3-step drop or a 5-step or 7-step drop, he was 1 step and firing because he knew he didn't have much time because of his injured offensive line. So to think that they were able to put those drives together late with a patchwork offensive line is really quite impressive.
Yeah, and even talking with Micah Johnson after the game, I mean, all things considering, he played great. He's never practiced at offensive line. He's never played offensive line in his career.
Big, strong guy.
He had 1 drive, earlier in August, where he played 1 series for on the offensive line. That was his official first time playing, but to play a full half of football. He said after the game that he doesn't practice there. It was all just reactionary. He didn't know the play calls. He didn't know any of the formations. He was just reacting to whatever was coming at him, and that obviously says a lot about the player that he is, that he was able to do that, just his physicality.
Yeah, they helped him out with some double teams, right? The tackle will come over and help him out a little bit, but not bad, all things considered. But it limits what the Rough Riders can do. So when you think about that, they did pretty well coming back in the second half. But the fact that they had such an opportunity, they knocked Zach. It was a dirty hit, but they knocked Winnipeg quarterback Zach Collaros out of the game. Miles Brown did. A helmet-to-helmet hit, was penalized. It was dirty. Shouldn't be allowed, and those are the type of things they got to stop. But it meant that the Rough Riders all of a sudden don't have to face a guy who's shredding their defense right at that moment, right? He threw for, 220 yards in the first half. And then in comes Chris Streveler, who's their short yardage quarterback for Winnipeg. He threw like 6 times in the whole second half. They got 6 points, I think. Yeah, 6 points throughout the rest of the game. So Saskatchewan totally was in position to win that game because of the situation. It's unfortunate Zach Collaros got hurt. Of course it is, because he's got a history of concussions. And I know that Winnipeg's very angry about that hit. Taylor, we were talking about it before. Conveniently enough, they forget that Adam Bighill, their middle linebacker, pile drove Shea Patterson, the backup quarterback for the Riders, in their earlier meeting, the game that Saskatchewan won the first time. And that wasn't dirty in Winnipeg's mind, right? But meanwhile, Adam Bighill got fined for the late and cheap hit that wasn't penalized. So it's funny how things go. But not having Zach Collaros in the game obviously made a huge difference and allowed the Rough Riders a chance to come back.
Yeah, they obviously held Streveler in check. They held Brady Oliveira in check, who's
good job on that one. Yeah.
So this run defense is great, but the Miles Brown hit, to me it's debatable. Of it was dirty, but it wasn't malicious, is how I would describe it. It wasn't one of those ones where he put his head down and tried to spear him with the crown. It was just, you could see him lower the shoulder. I don't think he targeted high by any means, but he did hit him in the helmet. I believe it looked like shoulder to chest and chin area first, and then obviously the follow through goes into the helmet. So I wouldn't call it clean, but I also wouldn't call it malicious.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I would say the same thing. He's got to be much more careful when he plays that way, right? Go lower. Go, if you're aiming for his chest, that's where you've got to drive through and realize, as you said, there's that little whiplash effect when he hit him helmet to helmet, especially Zach Collaros, is where he wears that extra protected helmet because of his history of concussions. You can't do things like that. They've got 7 of the 9 teams have lost quarterbacks this year to injuries, right? So including the Rough Riders losing Trevor Harris. If they want this game to succeed, I know the game has changed and everybody's saying, oh, it's such a sissy game now. It's not anymore. You just realize that you have to keep your quarterbacks healthy. They're the most important guys. They're going to get hit. Of course they are. But you can't have helmet-to-helmet contact. You can't go down for their legs. There's certain things that you can't do around a quarterback, and Miles Brown is guilty of doing something wrong.
Yeah, and the timing of that hit, I think, was ultimately, it was late, in my opinion. He had thrown the ball, and it was late and high. So 2 things going against him. We'll see if there's any discipline coming from this week. And obviously, as followers of the CFL and fans of the league, we hope that Zach is recovering. We hope that he's okay and he can play, in the Banjo Bowl. I think that sets up a good rematch if Zach is able to come back and guide Winnipeg in the rematch this Saturday over in Winnipeg, because I think that, like I said, as fans of the CFL, we want to see the best players on the field, and Zach is the best player for Winnipeg.
Yeah, but not having him there gives the Rough Riders an amazing chance to win, right? So you're right. The Rough Rider fans are thinking, okay, I hope he's okay, but I hope he can't play on Saturday in the rematch. So interesting. And reminder, that game is going to be on CTV, right? Isn't that like the first game on CTV since 1986?
Yeah, it's an hour earlier too. Well, it's at 1 o'clock.
They moved it ahead, right? So interesting. We'll see. I'm pretty sure they'll be used. I don't know this. I should have checked on this. Probably using TSN announcers, I'm guessing, because I don't think CTV has anybody really on staff to do that. But it'll be interesting, and just it's good to have another broadcast partner in the league.
Yeah. So they're 0-5-1 in their last 6. Can they snap the losing skid on Saturday?
If Chris Streveler's playing, I think so. If Zach Collaros is playing, I think the Riders are in trouble. Going into Winnipeg, it's not a good place. It's a tough, loud place to play, right? Saskatchewan, interesting. Remember Mosaic Stadium, 33,800 and something. Largest crowd ever at Mosaic Stadium. They allowed some standing room tickets to be bought, so it exceeded their capacity. And you know that in Winnipeg, it's just as big and just way louder even, right, in reality. So they're in trouble going into Winnipeg. Everybody was saying that it was such a must-win on the Labor Day Classic was, and you kept thinking, well, yeah, but the winner goes into first place. Yeah, but the loser dropped down to third too, didn't they, temporarily? We'll see where everything goes in the standings. But going into Winnipeg, there are more and more must-wins. And the horrible thing about the winless skid, Taylor, is we've watched for the last 2 years as they've lost 7 in a row to end the season and finish with 6-12 records and miss the playoffs. That's the feeling that you get from Saskatchewan fans, from everybody else around the outside of the team. They're panicking and saying, This is just like last year. It's worse than last year and the year before, right? And they're a better team, but they're in the same situation.
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't say it feels like last year, and obviously that was to end the season. It just felt like it was going downhill. I still feel like there's hope here, and to me, a must-win game is classified as mathematically. So
Mm-hmm.
sure, they can say every game's a must-win game, but until you're mathematically forced to win the game to keep your playoff hopes alive, I think the Riders are still in a good, not a great spot, but a good spot based on the West Division. I think Edmonton's going to come on strong here in the second half. BC's going to play better with Nathan Rourke, and Winnipeg is still going to play well. So they're going to be in tough because those are three good teams that are battling for. I don't really know about Calgary, but three good teams that are battling for four good teams that are battling for three playoff spots in the West. One of them is going to be on the outside looking in. So if you're Saskatchewan, you do need to start to put wins together. And like I said, until they're must-win games mathematically, you can't really.
And
say
no chance for a crossover from the West into the East this year. Isn't that amazing? It's like the East's best record in like 50 years against the West. So that's a big thing too. That it's for sure only three teams from the West going in, and there are certainly four teams capable. It's funny, we're all writing off Calgary. Calgary mathematically is still very much alive, and home and home. We're recording this before their game on Monday, before their Labor Day Classic against Edmonton, and they got a home and home as well. So that can put them in a interesting situation if they were to pull off 2 wins. So suddenly they're back in it. But I agree with you. I think Calgary is the weakest team in the West, and probably not going to be a playoff team. So there's still quite a race, and the chance for a home playoff game didn't quite go out the window in that Labor Day Classic loss. But I think the window's closing.
It is still there mathematically, right? I'll always go back to that,
Mm-hmm.
where they still have a chance. But I mean, if we'll talk about this next week after the Banjo Bowl, but if they manage to drop this game and they're winless in 7 heading into a bye week, is it panic mode? Do any changes need to be made? That's always the thing, where the bye week is where the big changes are made and moves are made. Obviously, they're not going to fire the head coach or any of the coordinators, I would say, but I mean, like we said, we can talk about this next week if it comes down to that. But is it panic mode yet?
No. What are the real flaws? They're little flaws, right? They're little things that they're not doing. They're missing a tackle. They're missing a blitz. Eau Claire missed a blitz, right? They're dropping balls. They had a bad game from their field goal kicker one game, and who seems to have redeemed himself. They had bad strategy against Toronto. There's little things, but they're not. It's always something different. If it's the same thing going wrong, then you've got to make a change. But if it's this thing, that thing, this thing, that thing, which it seems to be for the Rough Riders, I'm writing about how long the list is of reasons for their losses. It's always something different, it seems like. So do you make changes during the bye week? No, I don't think so, other than maybe go work on the basics once again. And I know that's what coaches always say they like to do during the bye week. We're going to go back and work on the basics. But that's kind of what they have to do, because the basics are the things that are letting them down. And they're not a bad team. I think they're fairly talented. The injuries along the offensive line have really hurt them. It just keeps wearing down. They get thinner and thinner at that spot. But they're competitive in every game, and you got to give them credit for their guts. You can't question their enthusiasm and their willingness they have to play for each other.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Trevor Harris did say post game, is that there's still that belief within the locker room, and he said there's still a championship team, and they're going to look back on this in a month and a half from now, when November rolls around, that all of these ways that they've found to lose, they're going to learn, grow, not lose like that again, because they've gone through this adversity. Every championship team usually goes through some adversity. I mean, the 13 team, went through that winless streak midway through the year. That's not the same. I'm not saying that's the same here, but every championship team is going to face a lull. So can this adversity make them stronger? Right. That's the cliche. And maybe, I mean, we'll find out in November, but the fact that they're competitive, they believe in each other, they play together. They're out of the honeymoon phase that they were in to start the season with Corey Mace, but they're not out of it yet, right? I think they still have the pieces in place. The injuries are very tough, as you mentioned, but I still think they have the belief and the competitiveness to make a run in this division this year.
Yeah, I think they're competitive. Are they a Grey Cup competitor or contender? Maybe not. They're close. They're certainly worthy of being a playoff team, and they haven't given up on themselves. And the interesting thing to me was at the end of the half on Sunday, the Riders had been pretty bad that first half. Right, a lot of things didn't go right for them. As they were walking off, we had the windows open in the press box, and we're all saying, and we're all listening, straining forward. Nobody booed them. So you're right. The honeymoon is over for Corey Mace, but it's not as if everybody is turned on them. Mm-hmm. And I think that probably will help this football team a little bit too, because Corey Mace spoke about that in the post-game press conference. Stick with it, stay green, and all those things. And I think that's a pretty good sign that if the fans aren't turning on them, then I don't think that it will lead to the players turning on each other either. And I think they're not in a bad position psychologically or within the community that they have to worry about that.
All right. Well, let's see what they can do in the Banjo Bowl this week as they try to snap their winless skid and give some payback to the Bombers for what they did in the Labor Day Classic. All right. That'll do for episode 148 of the Rider Rumblings podcast. Thanks, as always, Darrell, for joining.
All right, Taylor. Thanks a lot.